12 noon on the dot, and I do want to get us started. Just a little reminder for folks that we are being recorded today, and just got to get that notice off my screen. And so a wholehearted welcome to all of you in this third installment of the Hope, Healing, and Recovery Exchange. These conversations have been well received so far, and we're so happy that that you're able to join us today as we yet again have some opportunity to speak together. These sessions were very much designed in support of all of you working in healthcare and caring for others during this pandemic, and in the acknowledgement that we have been impacted by this work during this time. And so these sessions are designed to hear from all of you, as well as offer ideas and support in doing our work well and staying well. And so, folks, just a few reminders as we get started that all participants are muted, that you can use the chat box to comment. And of course, I've already mentioned that this session will be recorded, and at the end we will have a list of resources, as well as a link to the evaluation. So, and I want to take a moment to introduce myself, Diana Tickus, and my co-facilitator, Dr. Joe Pellizzari. Hello. And Joe, you can see from the slide that Joe's job title is much longer than mine. And I will just say, essentially, both of us have been very involved in our roles, myself as a social worker and Joe as a psychologist, in supporting staff, team, leader, and physician wellness right across our organization. So I work at Hamilton Health Sciences, and Joe is at St. Joseph's in Hamilton.
Welcome, everyone.
I also want to take a moment to acknowledge all of our partners, and especially want to acknowledge our partners that will be contributing more directly today, who are the McMaster Community Research Platform, and the McMaster Advanced Research, McMaster Advanced Research on Mental Health and Society. And so we really appreciate you being here with us for our presentation today on emotional labor. And of course, it's very important, I think, for all of us to take a moment to acknowledge, to do a land acknowledgement. And I feel it's even more important as we do these things now so much in a virtual world, and we're all coming together from different places. I want to take a moment for to invite all of you to acknowledge the lands from where we work, live, and come together today. I, like many of you, live on the lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, who have lovingly cared for these lands for thousands of years. And I thank them for this careful tending, and really want to acknowledge that we must, as settlers, do so much more to learn from and respect the deep wisdom and teachings of the many Indigenous people whom we live alongside. So here everyone can see the goals of the Hope, Healing, and Recovery Exchange. And I just want to invite all of you to take a moment at the end of the presentation today to fill out the evaluation, because we very much want to be able to continue to support and hear your voices. And the only way that we can do that is by receiving your feedback and suggestions on future presentations. So without any further ado, I want to get right to introducing our speakers. So we will be hearing from Dr. Diana Singh today, who is a sociologist by training and specializes in how our emotions are connected to our psychological well-being. So real topic that's near and dear to my heart. She's a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Sociology at McMaster, where she supports a number of mental health-related projects in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and is also the executive director for the Advanced Research on Mental Health and Society initiative at McMaster. And I'd like to take a moment as well to introduce Sue Phipps, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Hamilton branch. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing and a McMaster in Health, and a Master, sorry folks, I get so used to saying McMaster, and a Master in Health Management from McMaster University, and is an adjunct professor at McMaster's School of Social Work. She is most inspired by collaborative, innovative partnerships to improve access to and quality of care for people with mental illness and problematic substance use. She's a founding member of the McMaster University Faculty of Social Sciences Community Research Platform. In addition to her work with CMHA Hamilton, Sue provides cognitive processing therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder with the Center of Rehabilitation and Health in Toronto, and serves on the board of directors of PATH Employment Services. So welcome, Sue. And Peter Blumendahl is the director of clinical services for the CMHA Hamilton branch. Peter has a passion for delivering compassionate, client-centered care. In his current role, he continues to see clients for both case management and dialectical behavior therapy, while also supporting his frontline staff. During the pandemic, Peter was involved in developing and delivering a new program to support frontline workers, helping them to cope with the increased stress and anxiety experienced at work. He plays a key role on the Wellness Committee at CMHA Hamilton and is involved in creating new programs for CMHA Hamilton that focus on staff wellness and promote a culture of psychological health and safety. So I think we have a really wonderful team here and a very like-minded team. So I really look forward to hearing from all of you. And as a way to start, we are going to open up with a word cloud. And so folks, the way you can do this is by holding up your phone up to the QRL code, and it will take you directly to the link for the poll. And once you get to the poll, you will have an opportunity to respond to the question here, which is, what word comes to mind when you think of the term emotional labor in the context of your work duties? Okay, so we already got our first word up there. Okay. Yes, so many of you may know how a word cloud works, that the larger the word, the more times we have a response from folks participating. So the words that are coming up here are compassion, exhausted, strained, taxing, pressure, drained, difficult, empathy, moral injury, giving of self at work at the sake of myself and my personal life, pressure, patience, women, empathy, unrelenting, frustrated, burnout, fatigue.
I like these word clouds. It gives us all an opportunity to really connect on what we've been through over these last couple of years, hey?
Yes. Yeah, and I really like the whole breadth of the words, right? We have the words that challenge us, and we also, I think, have words that represent how we're getting through. So yeah, to hear the kindness, the empathy.
Yeah, good to see those described as well.
So folks, we will be saving this word cloud, and we will send it out along so that that folks have this as a memento of our talk today. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Diana Singh to pull up her slides and begin to describe for us in a lot more depth and with her infinite or her deep knowledge in regards to her research around emotional labor. So welcome, Diana. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe and Diana. I'm just going to pull up my slides here and confirm that you can all see it. Is everyone able to see it? Perfect. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. First, I want to thank all the organizers of the Hope Healing and Recovery Exchange for inviting me to present today. I'm happy to be here to talk about the concept of emotional labor, a little bit about current research in the area, and talk about a current project that my fellow panelists, Sue, Peter, and I are working on, entitled Emotions Matter. So I'll just start off by saying that some of you may or may not have heard of emotional labor, but it seems like most of you have. And I'm very mindful of the fact that emotional labor can be a bit of a confusing topic because there's so many interpretations of it. And I hope that by discussing it here with you all today, you might gain a better sense or clear understanding of the concepts and how they relate to you personally. And so I guess I'll start off with, what do emotions at work look like, or what does this mean? So to gain a better understanding of this, I'm going to move into the realm of sociology and think about emotions more broadly. So we can all, understand emotions as a private experience and how they operate in our private lives. But thinking about how emotions operate and the function that they serve in our public life is very different because, the things we feel, the way we display our emotions, our general presentation of ourselves to the public world is subject to, what we would call social rules. And we can call these actually feeling rules. And there are examples of this from the podcast Work Life. And that is or will be shared with you as a link. But it talks about how in everyday life with family and friends, we follow rules of etiquette or behavior, which also include how we should display emotions to others in different situations. But when we think about these social rules in an even more public context, like in the realm of our places of work, rules about interactions and feelings are with us all day. And even more so in service occupations where there's this type of navigating feelings, feeling rules and emotions, but instead at work, they're explicitly a part of your job. And most often they're occurring with strangers, not all the time, but most of the time with strangers. And so this leads to the concept of emotional labor. So emotional labor was a concept that was first developed by the sociologist Arlie Hochschild in her book, The Managed Heart, which was published in 1983. And Hochschild described emotional labor as involving this process of transforming our personal feelings and emotions to ensure that they are appropriate or aligned with performing our work role. And I won't get into the details about the research in The Managed Heart, but the piece really demonstrated that there is a labor involved in having to express certain emotions while having to regulate and even suppress one's own sort of true or personal feelings, which is very much an invisible type of labor. But it's much the same as physical or cognitive work requirements in that it is labor, but it is invisible. But we know from research and case studies and our own experiences that some occupations require more emotional labor than others. And healthcare is one area where occupations are emotional labor intensive. So for example, professionals like yourselves who work in these occupations experience and engage with emotions in very complex ways, more so than what we would see in interactive customer service, for example. So the reason is first, there is a self-focused component of the experience and management of one's own emotions, in addition to an other focused or kind of patient client, focused component of the experience and management of the emotions of others. And so I'm sharing with you here a more recent study, one that was published in 2020, so the year that the pandemic started. And the title itself is, very powerful in the message it carries, right? That I don't have any emotions, an ethnography of emotional labor and feeling rules in the emergency department. I won't get into too much detail about the research, but what the researchers identify are 4 very pronounced, explicit feeling rules that operate amongst healthcare workers in the emergency department that they studied, which is first to feel tough, fearless, and detached, and to feel calm yet in control, to feel empathy and not feel resentment, and to not feel too much distress or grief. So what the researchers have identified in their study are essentially the rules that exist explicitly among this group of healthcare workers that create the need to engage in emotional labor. So through feeling rules and norms, this is how emotional labor becomes a requirement, essentially. And identifying feeling rules is important because it sets the context for then understanding the emotional labor process. So, which I'm displaying to you on the screen here. So when we think about, the previous example of the emergency department feeling rules, the question then becomes, how do we fulfill these emotional labor requirements? And this is where that internal kind of psychological process of emotion management comes into play. So in the literature, in this area, we know that there are 2 main emotion regulation strategies that are used to navigate emotional labor. And the first is surface acting. So surface acting is when you're portraying an emotion outwardly that you don't actually feel. So in this sense, you are faking and suppressing the required emotions. And while the second one is deep acting. And so this is where there's a real internal kind of psychological effort that's placed on trying to actually feel and express the required emotion in instances, of course, where your feelings and emotions are in opposition to what's required. So you're modifying your emotions and thought processes here to match the expected role. And we know from research in the area that deep acting is a healthier regulatory response than faking and suppressing your emotions consistently. And there are, of course, known consequences in the emotional labor research around repeated exposure to this over time. So some of the consequences often examined in research are health related, such as burnout, psychological distress, emotional exhaustion. While there's also much concern over the concept of emotional dissonance. And this is where one becomes estranged from what they feel and what they have to display. And research on the consequences of emotional labor draws on different models for understanding stress, but also heavily looking at psychological resources as a kind of protective factor. So in the sociology of mental health literature around the stress process model, there's a stress buffering hypothesis where the positive presence of personal and social resources like social support, mastery, and self-esteem, it has the capacity to mute the impact or relationship between exposure to stressors and distress and acts as a kind of protective mechanism for mental health. And we also know that there's a number of workplace contextual resources that are quite salient in also kind of buffering strain and helping to support building the skills to successfully engage in healthier emotion regulation strategies. So in particular, so in particular, social support is a psychosocial resource that can reduce the depleting effect of emotional labor health, particularly for emotional labor intensive work like healthcare and other community care contexts. And this provides a bit of a background for our current project that my fellow panelists and I are working on, which is a collaborative study. And the objectives of our project have really been to address the need for evidence-based research to help inform skill building tools and other supportive workplace resources to promote emotional resiliency, currently among CMHA staff, but then thinking about extending more broadly to community care workers beyond mental health and addictions. So last summer, my research team and I, along with Sue's team at CMHA, launched an employee health and well-being survey across 11 CMHA branches in Ontario. The results are in a series of reports that have been officially released on McMaster's website. But what we found was that in many ways, the results supported our earlier speculations that there's a current need to focus on staff resiliency coming out of the pandemic, especially with regards to emotional labor experiences. And so with the incredible expertise of Sue and Peter and their clinical team to really lead with our team at McMaster, the design and implementation of effective resources for staff's well-being and recovery from COVID, we've been able to use the results of the survey to inform the development of workplace resources to navigate emotional labor intensive work. So this includes a peer mentorship program, which will have a training manual for implementation, as well as an emotional labor skills training course. And these resources are currently exclusive to CMHA staff, but we're looking for funding options and other opportunities to hopefully expand this to healthcare workers beyond this group, and as we move into post-pandemic recovery. And that is, yep, the end. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you for doing this important work. Take use another Slido poll. So if we go back to slido.com, and as we think about Dr. Singh's presentation on this concept of emotional labor, please answer the following question. How often have you experienced a disconnect between the emotions you were feeling and the ones you felt you needed to display to others? So just take a few seconds to answer the poll. Okay, yeah, I see a range. I was thinking for a moment, like 100% we're saying frequently, but definitely majority of you are experiencing this a pertinent construct, and so 64% frequently, so like 2/3 are experiencing this quite frequently, about 1/3 sometimes, and still others seldom. And nobody is saying never, right? I think this is a topic that is so relevant. I think it's something that we can all connect with. In doing support work, I know that this is something that's been shared many times, and you've all been very, very open with communicating the impact of that on you. I'm hearing a microphone on. If someone is able to mute that, thank you.
I think, Joe, too, for me, the whole labor pieces, that's just the incredible exhaustion that I think we feel just from the energy output around that.
Yeah. And the outcomes aren't just psychological, right? I think Dr. Singh, you're presenting some of the outcomes, all physical. I think we can all kind of relate to how draining that this can be on our bodies, and now linked to things like high blood pressure and other physical outcomes. So thank you so much for your research on this topic. And it sounds like quite an amazing collaboration with the CN results, and kind of that program designed peer support and skill building. And and this is definitely something we hear from workers in terms of what's effective and what's needed, developing social support networks, peer supports, as well as developing skills in managing our well-being. All right, so thanks for participating in that. I think we'll make the transition to our panelists. And so we're gonna bring back Sue Phipps from the CMHA, who share her personal story and bring this concept alive even more. Sue, take it from here.
Okay, thank you so much, Joe. So hello, everyone. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to formally reflect on my personal experiences over these past 2 years. And so first, I'm going to describe a bit about myself and my experience of emotional labor during COVID-19. Am I completing my Bachelor of Science in Nursing? I likely learned about global pandemics. For context, at the end of my 3rd year in nursing school, I was a single mom on welfare. I just left a dangerously abusive relationship. I was the sole support parent of a 3-month-old baby. I experienced stigma from my family, my peers, my professors, and the healthcare system. I remember the intense shame from my own self-stigma, standing in the lineup, babe in arms, to meet my welfare worker. I silently observed the strangers in line with me, curious about what had happened to them. This ignited an interest in marginalized, underserved people, discriminated against in our society, injection drug users with HIV and AIDS, palliative patients, people living in poverty, people with mental illness. I focused my studies in these areas. Global pandemics were completely intangible to me then. I didn't pay attention to what was taught in nursing school about pandemic planning, and I assure you, it never once crossed my mind that I would ever be leading a healthcare organization through one. When COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic 2 years ago, it felt quite surreal, also quite terrifying. Luckily, I'd overcome some obstacles in my time. I had faith in the strength of our organization, and thankfully I understood the basics of disease transmission and infection prevention and control. What I didn't consider was that pandemics and mental health are so intertwined. This became our knowledge immediately. First, United Way reached out to me requesting that CMHA Hamilton provide mental health support to frontline workers. Staff were scared of contracting COVID-19, afraid to infect their loved ones. Frontline workers were refusing work, becoming sick with COVID and taking leaves. Leaders were extremely fearful of the impact the pandemic was having on the workforce. In response, CMHA Hamilton developed a skill building support program for essential human services staff experiencing stress and anxiety from working on the front lines. Also, through McMaster's community research platform, we worked with Dr. Diana Singh on the Emotions Matter project. We wanted to better understand the emotional experiences of our staff serving in the mental health and addiction sector during COVID-19 to develop tailored courses. Slide 3, what am I? These are some of my traits. Once you start to realize the list could be never ending, it really just shows how complex humans are, that we can be both proud and humble, leaders and followers, strong, vulnerable, responsible, and fun-loving. In response to my fear, I took action. I burned the candle at both ends to stay on top of all the information, the situation reports, the evolving science, the new variants, the vaccines, and so on. My focus, to prevent transmission in the workplace. Over the years, I struggled to personal space, to manage my own and others' expectations, to make sound leadership decisions in the face of uncertainty, and to establish routine and order in setting is as secure as quicksand. At the start of the pandemic, I was both CEO and student doing my Master of Health Management. The intensity of school was a healthy distraction. At the same time, it was information overload. Work-life balance became impossible. I sacrificed my health for A grades. I was sleep deprived. I stopped eating well or exercising. Routine and order derailed. Goal planning felt impossible. It was a challenge because as a new leader in healthcare, I would prefer to demonstrate a collaborative leadership style, to be a servant leader, but suddenly I had to become authoritative. This was uncomfortable for me, but effectively implementing the provincial and municipal controls demanded. I completed my master's degree in April 2021, invest in my health and reconnect with my friends. Alas, my dear, frail 87-year-old mother's MOCA score had dropped from 17 to 8 out of 30, her dementia likely expedited by isolation and loneliness during lockdown in that first year of the pandemic. Her rapid cognitive decline meant she needed my increased support with her care and finances. Her circadian rhythm became affected. My sleep interrupted at 4 a.m., mom calling to see if I was coming to dinner, thinking it was 4 p.m. Together, we experienced hallway healthcare emerge during COVID-19. My mom just couldn't understand the uncomfortable wait, attempting to bolt several times before she was seen. I was well aware of the hospital system pressures. Hearing this firsthand from colleagues, this enabled me to be up to the emerged doctors completely run off their feet. Thankfully, my mom didn't have to be admitted. One of my biggest fears, aside from the health of our staff, most certainly that I would contract COVID-19. My focus was on mitigating risk, my daily mantra, just do what needs to be done. A friend I've known since the 90s, who pre-COVID I went drilling through the woods on mountain bikes with, and roller skating, water skiing, canoe tripping, or pushing ourselves at the climbing gym, accused me of fear-based thinking. I had declined her invitation to go skating. I was worried to do what was needed to be done. I love thrilling adventures, so her observation felt like a terrible insult. I sat with it, angry with her for saying something so far from the truth. Then suddenly I realized she was absolutely right. It can take a close friend to see the changes in you when you aren't doing well, often before you see them in yourself. When I sought therapy for the first time in my life, it was extremely useful. Having been so focused on mitigating the workplace, thinking it's a permanent myself have fun. I wasn't doing things that brought joy. Life and in relation. Connect between how we show up at work and how we show up in the rest of our lives. I find myself in caretaking roles both at home and at work, and often serve as therapist for my friends and family. Caretaking roles require emotional labor. It's not that we want to get rid of emotional labor altogether, but it's necessary to understand the consequences of emotional labor and how to manage the stress that comes from it. Some of the consequences include emotional dissonance, increased stress, fatigue, and reduced self-efficacy. I would say I have experienced all of these consequences of emotional labor during the pandemic. Deep acting is one strategy I do use regularly to reduce the stress of emotional labor. Basically, I remind myself that the behavior I want to portray is in line with a deeper value I have. For example, people's well-being is extremely important to me, and so my commitment to building trusting relationships and helping people is actually reflected authentically in my emotional expression. Slide 6, what have I needed? Again, an ending list. I won't touch on each of them here, but I will say that practicing gratitude daily brings people, PTSD, curiosity about people, a desire to understand you, trust given to me to only share the fear and anger so that I may from their perspective. I'm grateful about others and the sharing the healing and growth of my clients feeds my soul. It's meaning and purpose from what I need in life. A skill I've mastered that brings me peace and happiness. Slide 6, the wolf is my spirit animal. I am not a religious person, but I am spiritual, and I find nature. Woods at dusk or dawn. On occasion, I found myself eye-to-eye with wolves or coy wolves. These interactions have been precious and awe-inspiring. Because of this, I feel a connection to the wolf. It is said that if the wolf has manifested its presence as a guide in your life, it is a call to live freely, an invitation to look at what support. Strive to do this. Also, the poem by Rudyard Kipling states The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the... For me, as CEO CMHA Hamilton, I know my strength as a leader in healthcare is fueled by those around me, my mentors, my colleagues, my friends, my family. Connection with people is so essential for belonging, emotional support, diverse perspectives, and collective intelligence. Acknowledging and drawing strength from past has been imperative and thriving through COVID-19. Working in healthcare, we often don't share these intimate parts of ourselves. We feel more secure in science and evidence. We put on our professional hats and often hide our authentic selves. If we pretend we are not profoundly impacted by the depth of our work, we're not allowing ourselves to deeply feel the losses of the people we serve. Is the reason I chose this work, and also the reason it can be so very hard. Thank you for this opportunity to express myself in this way. I hope my gives you to take care of yourself.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was very, very moving. And I want to start by just sharing some things in the chat here. People sending hugs. Wow, what a beautiful person you are. Thank you so much for sharing. Always appreciated all that you shared and really have as well. We love you. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Sue. You are truly an inspiration. Thank you for being you, and they keep on coming. So you are incredibly inspiring, an incredible woman. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You did that in such a captivating way, weaving together the personal with the professional, both as a clinician and also as a leader, and bringing alive this concept of emotional labor. I think one quote struck me early in your story: "Just do what needs to be done," and I think we can all relate to that. We've all kind of been there and also kind of felt the effects of that. And I really love the way that you took that and described your story of recovery, and ending with the wolf as spirit guide. So thank you again for sharing that, Sue.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful working with everyone here.
So we'll now call on Peter Blumendahl. Peter, take it from here and share your story.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. When I consider the term emotional labor in the context of my work in frontline healthcare, I am reminded first and foremost of the things that brought me into this field in the first place. I grew up in a stable, comfortable home. I don't have trauma that I hold from my childhood, and I can't remember ever missing a meal because my family didn't have the resources to provide for me and my brothers. The struggles we endured weren't overly different from many middle-class, privileged families during the time. I never really knew what I wanted to do in my career, but through seeing members of my community struggling with an array of issues related to poverty and health, I always knew I just wanted to help people. My emotions were and are connected to the welfare of others. And still to this day, when a tragedy strikes my community, I'm inherently empathic to its impact on people. I had a few in my life that suggested social work as something I could find meaningful and fulfilling, and I'm happy to say after 15 years in the field that they were right. In my work, one of the roles I fill is to be a member of our workplace wellness committee. A few years back, we had a representative from the Occupational Health and Safety Clinic survey the staff about factors affecting our psychological health and safety in our workplace. There were two glaring results that immediately stood out to me. One, far more than any other factors, the emotional demands of the work ranked by far the most significant factor affecting the staff. It ranked much worse than Canadian average for workplaces. The second result that stood out to me is the meaning of work, by contrast ranking much better than the Canadian average. These results weren't exactly alarming to me. Instead, I found them quite validating. While everyone's journey into the helping profession will vary, what these results would suggest is that it's more common than not for workers to come to healthcare due to personal conviction to help the sick and impoverished in our community. I've worked many jobs growing up prior to joining in this field, many of which were physically laborious. Whether it's landscaping, woodworking, or general labor, I was never really concerned with the exhaustion that would come from the work, and I was well prepared for each day. What was different for me in this field is that I wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of the stories and the problems that I would face. I can vividly recall a moment in my first field placement when I worked at a detention center with young offenders. I was staying after hours in the office to complete some of my notes for the day, so my field instructor had left. There was a knock on my door from a very distressed youth that had just been brought into custody and needed to speak to somebody urgently. I sensed this urgency and saw the expression in his face, and I just felt like the right thing to do would be to give this person a moment of my time. He went on to speak about abuse that was happening in his family home. He discussed concerns for his younger brother. He talked about how no one takes him seriously because his dad was a police officer. I notified the people that I needed to. I provided whatever support I could in the moment, but I left my placement that day feeling full of thoughts and rumination, but completely drained emotionally. I was actually supposed to host, or I did host, a social event that evening, but the truth is I wasn't feeling overly social. It was the first of many times in my career where I've taken the stress of my work home with me. In that moment, I had friends to support me through it, as I didn't know how to process the situation. I think I responded in an ordinary and effective way. I wish I could say the same about the hundreds of other times I've been impacted by the stories I've heard and the situations that I've experienced. There were moments in my career where I felt like it was doing suicide interventions almost weekly. The first lesson I learned in the field was to be present, be genuine and honest with clients. My job is to help. It is to be empathic. It is to, as Brene Brown puts it, to feel with people. In processing that moment with the youth that I was working with, I think I did pretty well that time. Over time in the field, however, my interactions with clients began to feel quite familiar. I found myself saying the same phrases and statements I had used before. I would put on the same facial expressions that felt appropriate, but I stopped feeling the emotions that previously coincided with them. It began to feel like my ability to be genuine was manufactured. It is a very real thing that we do in the helping profession, but it began to feel more like performance than real, and I struggled with that. I didn't really want to share stories about my work with others. I didn't want to burden my wife with hundreds of stories of trauma, pain, neglect, and tragedy. I recall a day where a new client of mine finally felt comfortable enough to share his story of trauma with me. I could see his anxiety as he paced back and forth in my office. We spent a long time working through some of the events that transpired with him. In the moment, I felt like it was a resounding progress for someone to feel that comfortable with a mental health worker to share things he hadn't with anyone before is a gift of vulnerability. In the moment, I was able to genuinely treat it as such. When that day ended, however, I remember driving on the QEW to my home, and my prevailing thought was, I need a drink. Unfortunately, it has been a phrase I've said to myself numerous times since that day. I still find myself having those thoughts. On my better days, I have the insight to know that to be an unhealthy response to stress that I was taking home. And on my worst days, that realization doesn't come until the next morning. And now I was going back to work with the feeling of already being exhausted. I had come from a place where I was younger, where I could speak to my personal supports and process the stress that I took home, to a new place where now my mindset had just shifted to escape. My thoughts shifted from how can I continue to support my clients to a place where I thought, how can I just get through today? In my early career, I prided myself on waking up in the morning and not dreading the fact that it was a Monday or a work day. I was doing what I felt I was meant to do. I was working in a career that was fulfilling and important to me. For a while, I came to a place where that mindset had shifted. The emotional demands of the work began to outweigh how much the work meant to me, and the convictions that brought me into the field in the first place. I'm glad that I eventually found the insight to realize this. The work I do and my ability to do it is a part of my identity. It's a part of who I am. And I learned this quickly when working in the field. When friends and family members learned that I worked in mental health, I was amazed by the amount of phone calls I received from people who were struggling and needed support. For many, there's a stigma in seeking support from mental health struggles, and part of my identity as a mental health professional helped me represent a safe space for people to disclose things for me and ask for help in my personal life. To this day, I quite welcome this. It's validating for me that what I do matters and has impact. The challenge, however, is recognizing when my own limits are being stretched. I do remember a time in my earlier career when I had to tell a friend of mine I couldn't help her with some of the mental health struggles she was having. My cup was full and my capacity to help was already overloaded. It wasn't an overly close friendship, but the situation did result in that individual not wanting to talk to me anymore. And I remember feeling so guilty and angry about it and not knowing if I had done the right thing. When we become overwhelmed as a system, when we're supporting clients, we often see wait lists. We know the impact this approach often has on individuals who are looking for immediate help. It's not ideal, and it prevents us from being too overwhelmed. Measures like this don't exactly exist with family and friends. Even though I felt guilty for not being able to help, I never doubted the need to set limits at the time. It was a recognition that I couldn't be everything for everyone in my life, and I had to take care of myself sufficiently too. I do my best to accumulate positives in my personal life, whether it's playing with my children, going for hikes, or spending time with family and friends. I've been fortunate to have plenty of outlets and supports to be able to properly care for myself. Over the course of the pandemic, there has been some challenges with this, however, whether it was the overload of frightening information coming through the news, the constant changes in policies and procedures in my workplace, the lockdowns that limit my ability to celebrate holidays and important events, or merely getting together with friends socially. What I noticed for myself, however, is the shift in my own prioritization of my own health and my own care. What happens when I no longer have guests coming to my home? Do I still need to keep my place clean and tidy? What happens when my work colleagues are only seeing me from the shoulders up? Can I stay in pajama pants throughout the day while I'm working? With everything going on in the world, how important is it for me to shave? Or can I grow an unkempt COVID beard? Some of the accountabilities that encouraged me to care for myself in my home had been removed. On one hand, I had a wave of negative global events affecting my emotions, and on the other, I had less protective factors to encourage me to care for myself. This made me quite vulnerable to indifference with my own mental health at times. In that indifference, I often had let things slide. I remember the restrictions loosened last summer, and I was able to have a small family event outdoors for my son's first communion. One of the thoughts that came to me afterwards was, it's just nice to have a reason to wear a suit and tie again. Not one that often looked forward to formal events, but the absence of them in my life was certainly felt. I deserve to look nice and to dedicate sections of my life to important events that are positive and enriching. In a world experiencing a lot of gloom, it has been more important than ever for me to recognize and work for things to celebrate. It's very hard to do this when we're stuck in a negative space. As we recover from much of the impact of this pandemic, I'm reflective on what has always brought me back and helped me persevere through such difficult circumstances, whether they stem from workplace stress, stresses at home, international events. I've always needed hope to motivate me. Sometimes a metaphorical kick in the butt from someone close to me has helped as well. But it's hope that we will get through these events that allows me to be the best version of myself, the most productive version of myself. One of the huge reasons for hope has been projects like this. It's important to be part of real positive change. We can never become too consumed with the history being made that is outside of our control that we forget our own role in writing history that is within our control. That type of mindset tends to keep me going. I just want to close with a quick recognition of someone who inspires me to be hopeful. And I grew up with my Oma telling me stories of growing up in Holland during World War II. She spoke about how she would scavenge umbrellas so the family could sew them into clothing to wear during those hard times. I was reminded by this when her retirement home was hit very hard at the outset of this pandemic. She told me it was the most unsettled she had felt since World War II. In characteristic fashion, she kept busy during that time by taking the fabric donations from the local church and sewing face masks for charities and people in her building. Yesterday, my Oma turned 90 years old, and it's stories like hers that remind me of one of the reasons to be hopeful. There are tremendous people who have been doing tremendous things for our community throughout this chaos we've been living through, and history has shown us that these periods can and do pass. Thank you.
I want the chat and just share how some people are reacting to your story. Peter, thanks for your vulnerability and sharing your story. You are profoundly courageous, and we thank you for that. Thanks for the transparency, Peter. I appreciate your honesty, Peter, about our and the struggles people in our personal life. You were so articulate, Peter. Thank you for sharing your insights with your experiences, personal, really, and they keep me in, Peter. So again, thank you for such a touching story, very inspiring. I think truly captures what many of us have been through, and when came to this point, and that statement, hope motivates me, really struck me, and then how you really tied that in to things that are truly very important to you in terms of your family values. So Peter, thank you so much for sharing that, and I hope you have an opportunity to also kind of see in the chat what people are saying too.
Jump in, Joe?
Absolutely, Diana, because I just want to share something with everyone with our speech. We were actually on time.
So. That's a first.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll keep it short so we stay on time. But I mean, I was actually struck how you ended, Peter, with saying, and it just felt kind of the understatement of the year, because experience. And so I want to echo thank you. Absolutely true. Not